As he entered the orphanage with his daughter, the millionaire felt his heart race upon seeing a girl identical to her. Years ago, his wife had passed away during childbirth, and he believed that only one of his daughters had survived. The painful memories of losing his wife and the supposed death of one of the twins resurfaced with force. What if the daughter he mourned for years had never really passed away? If this story intrigued you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Let us know from which city you're watching and we'll continue. The imposing mansion, with its contemporary architecture, stood majestically in the most upscale neighborhood. Behind its electronic gates and meticulously maintained gardens, Daniel watched his daughter Emma through the window of his office. The 10-year-old played alone on the swing, her light blue dress swaying gently in the afternoon breeze. Her light brown hair, loosely braided, reminded him so much of Sophie that for a moment, Daniel felt that familiar ache in his chest. As the CEO of TechVasco, one of the largest technology companies in the country, Daniel had achieved everything he ever dreamed of in his professional field. His green eyes, though tired from the long hours dedicated to business, still held the determined sparkle that had taken him to the top. At 42, his only real concern was Emma, his little princess, growing up without a mother's presence. "Dad!" Emma's voice echoed through the garden, interrupting his thoughts. "Look what I found." She held something small in her hands, probably another of the little curiosities she loved collecting. Daniel set aside the documents on his mahogany desk and descended the marble staircase, adjusting the Italian suit he wore. Upon reaching the garden, he found Emma with a small origami bird she had learned to make at school. "It's beautiful." "Sweetheart." He smiled but noticed something different in his daughter's expression, that veiled sadness she tried to hide but that an attentive father could always perceive. "At school, Julia was showing pictures of her weekend with her sister," Emma commented, her voice lowering a tone. "They went to the amusement park together. It must be nice to have a sister, right, Dad?" The comment hit Daniel like an arrow. It wasn't the first time Emma had expressed this desire for companionship. The most expensive toys, ballet, piano, and English lessons didn't fill the void he sensed growing in his daughter. Maria, the longtime housekeeper, approached, with a glass of orange juice for Emma. "Sweetheart, it's time for your afternoon snack," she said with maternal kindness. Daniel watched as Emma ran inside, following Maria, who had long tried to fill the maternal role in the girl's life. That night, after putting Emma to bed, Daniel remained in his office, contemplating an old photo where Sophie smiled, pregnant, unaware that it would be her last spring. The businessman ran a hand through his graying temples, thinking about how much his life had changed since that fateful day at the hospital. A decision began to take shape in his mind as he reviewed some emails. Emma needed more than just occasional company from school friends or staff. She needed someone to share secrets, laughter, and even the little mischiefs of childhood. The next morning, during breakfast, Emma played with her pancakes, drawing faces with chocolate syrup, when Daniel made the announcement that would change their lives forever. "Emma, what would you think about having someone else in our family?" he asked, watching his daughter's reaction closely. The girl's eyes widened, shining with a mix of surprise and hope. "What do you mean, Dad?" "I was thinking about visiting a special place today. A place where children are looking for a family," Daniel explained, choosing his words carefully. "What do you think about having a little sister?" Emma dropped her fork, jumping up from her chair. "Really, Dad, can we?" Her enthusiasm confirmed to Daniel that he was making the right decision. After a few calls, he managed to schedule a visit to the Bright Future Orphanage for that very afternoon. The establishment had an excellent reputation and was just a few miles from their residence. During the ride to the orphanage, Emma couldn't stop asking questions. What will she be like? Will she like playing with dolls? Can I share my room with her? Daniel smiled, patiently answering each question while his private driver navigated the city's busy streets. What Daniel didn't know as they parked in front of the orphanage's blue gate was that that afternoon would change their lives in ways he could never imagine. Fate had woven a complex web of coincidences, or were they premeditated decisions, that was about to unfold. As they stepped out of the car, Emma squeezed her father's hand tightly. her anxiety palpable. The old but well-kept building emanated a welcoming atmosphere, with pastel-colored walls and large windows letting in sunlight. In the front yard, a few children played under the supervision of caretakers. A serious and professional-looking woman awaited them at the entrance. Helena, the orphanage director, had a serene expression and dressed discreetly. However, a fleeting flicker of unease crossed her eyes when she looked at Daniel, so subtle that it went unnoticed at that moment. "Welcome to Bright Future Orphanage," Helena greeted them with a restrained smile. "I'm Helena, the director, and you must be Mr. Daniel and little Emma." At that moment, a girl ran down the hallway behind Helena, and time seemed to freeze. Daniel felt the air escape his lungs as Emma let go of his hand, mouth agape. The girl who had just passed by was like a mirror image of his daughter. Identical, delicate features, the same face shape. Even the way she moved was identical. "Sophie," Helena called, her voice betraying a slight tremor. "Come here, sweetheart." The girl returned, stopping beside Helena, and Daniel's world began to spin at a dizzying speed. The two girls stared at each other, Emma and Sophie, like reflections in a mirror, while a truth still hidden started to emerge from the shadows of the past. The silence in the orphanage hallway was almost palpable. Daniel remained motionless, his gaze shifting between Emma and Sophie as his mind struggled to process the surreal scene before him. The two girls continued to study each other with childlike curiosity, seemingly less disturbed than the adults by the situation. Helena cleared her throat, trying to break the tension. "Sophie, sweetheart, why don't you go play with the other children in the yard?" Her voice was controlled, but her hands, nervously adjusting her grey blazer, betrayed her anxiety. "But Mom, I want to meet them," Sophie responded, her eyes fixed on Emma. The word Mom made Daniel arch his eyebrows, his businessman's instinct, trained to detect inconsistencies, immediately kicking in. "Sophie is my adopted daughter," Helena quickly explained, as if anticipating the questions forming in Daniel's eyes. "I adopted her when she was just a baby." Emma, oblivious to the tension between the adults, stepped forward. "Do you like making origami?" she asked Sophie, breaking the ice in the most natural way possible. Sophie smiled, revealing even the same dimples Emma had. "I love it. I learned to make a crane last week." "I know how to do that too," Emma exclaimed excitedly. "Dad, can we go play in the yard?" Daniel, still in shock, nodded mechanically. The two girls ran down the hallway, their identical laughter echoing through the orphanage walls. Helena made a move to follow them, but Daniel stopped her with a gesture. "Ms. Helena, we need to talk." His voice came out firmer than he expected. "In private, if possible." Helena hesitated for a moment before pointing to a door on the right. "This way, Mr. Daniel. My office will give us more privacy." The office was a modest room, with bookshelves covering an entire wall and a crucifix hanging behind the wooden desk. Helena sat down in her chair, gesturing for Daniel to take one of the seats in front of her. "The resemblance between the girls is remarkable," Daniel began, carefully choosing his words. "More than that, it's impossible." Helena maintained her professional posture, though her fingers drummed lightly on the desk. "Coincidences happen, Mr. Daniel. The world is full of them. Not of this magnitude." Daniel leaned forward. "When exactly did you adopt Sophie?" 10 years ago, Helena replied, her eyes briefly darting to a framed photo on her desk where a baby Sophie smiled. "Shortly after I took over the orphanage," Daniel felt his heart race. "The same time Emma was born," he murmured, more to himself than to Helena. "And before running the orphanage, where did you work?" Helena's face paled slightly. "I don't see how that's relevant to your visit, Mr. Daniel. You came here to meet children available for adoption, didn't you?" "Please, answer my question," Daniel insisted, his voice taking on the same commanding tone he used in high-stakes negotiations. Helena shifted in her chair, her discomfort increasingly evident. I was a nurse at St. Mary's Hospital." The revelation hit Daniel like a punch to the gut. St. Mary's Hospital, the same place where Sophie had given birth, the same place where she had passed away. The gears in his mind started turning furiously, connecting dots that had once seemed scattered. "You were there," he murmured, his eyes narrowing, "on the night of Emma's birth." Helena stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Mr. Daniel, I believe our conversation is taking an inappropriate turn. If you are still interested in meeting the children available for adoption, I can have my assistant accompany you." Daniel also stood, his imposing height making his presence even more intimidating. "Why did you leave the hospital right after that date? Why did you take over this orphanage specifically?" "I must ask you to leave," Helena said, her voice trembling slightly, "or I will be forced to call security." At that moment, children's laughter echoed through the office window. Daniel stepped closer, watching Emma and Sophie playing in the yard. They had found a cat and were petting it in the same way, with the same delicate gesture that Sophie had always used. "I will find out the truth, Miss Helena," Daniel declared, turning to face her. "And when I do, I hope you're prepared for the consequences." Leaving the office, Daniel found Maria, who had accompanied them on the visit, waiting in the hallway. "Maria, please call Emma. We're leaving." On the way back home, Emma couldn't stop talking about Sophie, how they had so many things in common, how wonderful it would be to have her as a sister. Every word she spoke was a confirmation of the suspicions now consuming Daniel's mind. That night, after putting Emma to bed, Daniel sat in his office and opened his laptop. On the screen he typed, "St. Mary's Hospital Records 2015. It was only the beginning of an investigation that promised to uncover long-buried secrets." On his desk, the photo of Sophie pregnant seemed to watch him with new eyes. Daniel touched the image gently, whispering, "Something is very wrong here, my love, and I'm going to find out what it is." The week following the visit to the orphanage transformed Daniel. The businessman, known for his calculated and rational demeanor, now found himself consumed by an obsession that kept him awake late into the night. His mansion office had turned into an improvised investigation center, with old documents spread across the table and notes covering a recently installed corkboard. Maria, the housekeeper, watched with concern as her employer's dark circles deepened while she served breakfast. Emma, sitting at the table, absent-mindedly sketched in her notebook. "Dad, when are we going back to the orphanage?" the girl asked, lifting her eyes from her drawing, which Daniel noticed was a portrait of her and Sophie. "Soon, sweetheart," he answered automatically, his fingers sliding over the tablet screen, searching for old news about St. Mary's Hospital. It was during one of these searches that he found his first concrete clue, a report from 10 years. I briefly mentioned an internal investigation at the hospital, which had been shelved due to a lack of evidence. The detail that caught his attention, the date coincided with the week of Emma's birth. "Mr. Daniel," Maria interrupted his thoughts, "the private investigator you hired is waiting in the library. Ricardo, a former police officer with extensive experience in private investigations, was known for his discretion and efficiency. Daniel found him analyzing the library's bookshelves." "What did you find?" Daniel got straight to the point. "Helena resigned from the hospital exactly 3 days after your daughter was born," Ricardo began, consulting his notes. "But the interesting part is that before leaving, she accessed the restricted medical archive. The system recorded her entry at 11:47 p.m., outside her normal shift." Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. "And what about the orphanage?" "Here's where it gets even more curious," Ricardo continued. "Bright Future Orphanage received a substantial anonymous donation that same week. The amount was enough to clear all the institution's debts and still fund a complete renovation." "Someone bought her silence," Daniel murmured, the pieces starting to fit together. "There's more," Ricardo added, lowering his voice. "I managed to locate a former hospital employee, Amanda. She worked in the maternity ward at the time and said she's willing to talk, but only in person. She seems scared." Daniel arranged to meet Amanda that very afternoon at a discreet cafe downtown. Amanda, a middle-aged woman with restless eyes, was already waiting at a back table. "Mr. Daniel," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I've carried a burden on my conscience for 10 years. When I saw your photo in the newspaper last week talking about technology, I recognized you immediately. I knew this past would one day return." "What happened that night, Amanda?" Daniel asked, leaning forward. "It was my first year. As a nursing assistant," she started, her hands shaking as she held her coffee cup. "The night shift was chaotic with multiple births happening at once. Your wife, she had complications." Daniel felt his heart tighten but remained silent, letting Amanda continue. "There was confusion in the delivery room. Dr. Rangel was in charge, but something went wrong. I remember Helena coming and going repeatedly, agitated. Then there was an emergency meeting with the hospital board. The next day everyone involved was called in and made to sign a confidentiality agreement." "What kind of agreement?" Daniel pressed. Amanda glanced nervously around before responding. "I don't know the details, but Helena changed after that. She, who had always been dedicated to her work, started missing shifts. She seemed different, distant. Then, suddenly, she resigned." As he drove home, Daniel couldn't stop thinking about Amanda's words. His driver, Jorge, noticed his restlessness through the rearview mirror. "Is something wrong, Mr. Daniel?" "Jorge, do you remember that night at the hospital?" Daniel asked. Jorge had been his driver for 15 years and was present when Emma was born. "How could I forget, sir? It was a chaotic night. I remember seeing Nurse Helena leaving hurriedly through the back door, carrying something in her arms. At the time, I didn't think much of it, but now..." Daniel felt his blood run cold. "Are you sure about that, Jorge?" "Absolutely, sir. I was waiting in the parking lot when I saw her. She got into a black car that was waiting for her. I thought it was odd, but with all the commotion that night..." As he arrived home, Daniel found Emma asleep on the living room couch, holding a drawing. Approaching, he saw that it depicted two identical girls holding hands, with a big heart in the background. Below, she had written, "Me and my sister Sophie." That night in his office, Daniel began assembling a mental map on his corkboard. Photos, dates, names, all connected by red lines that seemed to form an increasingly clear pattern. At the center, he placed two pictures, Emma and Sophie, side by side, identical down to the smallest detail. His phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. "Some truths should remain buried, Mr. Daniel, for everyone's sake." Instead of intimidating him, the message only strengthened his resolve. Picking up the phone, he called Ricardo. "I need you to find everything about Dr. Marcos Rangel, where he is now, what he did after that night, everything." The truth was there, hidden in the shadows of the past, and Daniel was getting closer to uncovering it. As Daniel delved deeper into his investigation, Emma was forming an inexplicable connection with Sophie. The girls had exchanged phone numbers during their first meeting at the orphanage and now talked daily through voice messages on Emma's phone. "Dad, Sophie has the same birthmark as me," Emma exclaimed during dinner, rolling up her sleeve to show the small, crescent-shaped mark on her right forearm. "Exactly in the same spot, isn't that amazing?" Daniel nearly dropped his fork. Every new coincidence was like a silent confirmation of his suspicions. "How did you find out, sweetheart?" "She sent me a picture today. We were comparing our favorite things and found out we have so many that are the same," Emma continued, excited. "Even our favorite ice cream flavor is the same, chocolate mint." Maria, who was serving dessert, exchanged a meaningful glance with Daniel. That was Sophie's favorite flavor. That same night, Daniel received a call from Ricardo. "Mr. Daniel, I found Dr. Rangel." His voice sounded agitated. "He's living under the name Carlos in a small town. He works as a general practitioner in a small clinic." "Why did he change his name?" Daniel questioned, already anticipating the answer. "Apparently, after the incident at St. Mary's Hospital, he gave up his medical license in the city. There was an out-of-court settlement involving a significant amount of money. The funds came from the same offshore account that made the donation to the orphanage." Daniel arranged a meeting with Dr. Rangel for the next day. Before leaving for the trip, he went to Emma's room, where she was still asleep. He watched his daughter for a few moments, noticing small details he had never paid attention to before. The way she furrowed her brow in her sleep, identical to Sophie. The clinic where Dr. Rangel worked was modest, located in a quiet street, in the countryside. The doctor, now with completely white hair and thin-rimmed glasses, paled when he saw Daniel enter his office. "I knew this day would come," he said, closing the door with trembling hands. "Ever since I saw your photo in the newspaper with the girl." "What happened that night, Doctor?" Daniel asked, keeping his voice controlled despite the storm inside him. The doctor sank heavily into his chair. "Your wife went into premature labor. The girls..." "Girls?" Daniel interrupted, his heart pounding. "Twins," Dr. Rangel confirmed, running a hand over his tired face. "The birth was complicated. The first baby was delivered without issues, but the second, there was a complication. For a moment, we thought we had lost her." Daniel felt the world spinning. "But you didn't lose her." "No," the doctor admitted. "When we realized she was alive, it was too late. The death had already been declared, the papers filled out. The hospital was under investigation for other negligence cases. If this came to light, so you decided to cover it up," Daniel completed, his voice filled with bitterness. "Helena was there. She didn't agree with our decision. She said she couldn't live with the lie. That's when she proposed taking the second baby and raising her as her own." Daniel stood up abruptly. "You stole my daughter." "It was a terrible mistake," Dr. Rangel admitted, tears forming in his eyes. "All these years I have carried this burden. When I found out Helena had become the orphanage director and kept the girl so close, I thought it was madness, that one day everything would be revealed. The DNA tests," Daniel murmured, recalling the missing samples. "You're still trying to cover it all up." "It wasn't me," the doctor protested. "After that night, I never got involved. Again, I left, changed my name, tried to start over. But some powerful people were part of the cover-up, people who don't want this story to come to light." On his way back home, Daniel received a message from Emma. "Dad, Sophie told me she has a ballet recital at her school next week. Can we go watch?" Ballet. Another coincidence. Emma had insisted on taking lessons, saying she felt she should dance. Now it all made sense. It was something in her blood, an inheritance from Sophie, who had been a ballet dancer in her youth. At home, Daniel found another envelope with no sender in his mailbox. Inside, a single photo, him and Sophie on their wedding day, with a message written on the back. "Some families should stay as they are." Ignoring the veiled threat, Daniel picked up his phone and called his trusted lawyer, Peter. "Peter, I need you to prepare a legal case. And I also want private security for my home and for Bright Future Orphanage." "What's happening, Daniel?" the lawyer asked, concerned. "I'm about to reclaim something that was stolen from me 10 years ago," Daniel replied, looking at a picture of Emma on his desk. "And this time, no one is going to stop me." The news about Daniel's investigation reached the orphanage on a Thursday morning. Helena was in her office when she received the legal notice, her hands trembling, as she opened the official envelope. Outside her window, she could see Sophie playing in the yard, unaware of the storm approaching. "Mom," Sophie called, entering the office. "Can I go to the mall with Emma on Saturday? Her dad invited us." Helena felt her heart tighten. In the past few weeks, the girls had grown closer in a way she had always feared. It was as if an invisible force pulled them together, defying all her efforts to keep the past buried. "Sophie, sit here," Helena asked, her voice soft. "We need to talk." On the other side of the city, Daniel was meeting with his lawyer at his corporate office. Peter spread documents across the glass table, including newly gathered testimonies from former hospital employees. "This is a delicate issue, Daniel," Peter explained, adjusting his glasses. "We have strong circumstantial evidence, but we need something concrete. The DNA test would be crucial." "The previous samples mysteriously disappeared," Daniel recalled, frustrated. "But now we have the right protection. Can we do new tests?" "Yes, but we need Helena's authorization as Sophie's legal guardian," Peter replied. "Or a court order." Daniel picked up his phone, showing the lawyer the latest pictures Emma had shared. She and Sophie sitting side by side at a shopping mall bench, identical even in their smiles. "Look at them, Peter. What judge would deny a DNA test with this as evidence?" At Bright Future Orphanage, Helena was finishing her conversation with Sophie, who looked at her with teary eyes. "So, you're not my real mom?" Sophie asked, her voice small. "Sophie, my love, Helena held the girl's hands. Being a mother isn't just about blood. It's about love, about care. And Emma, is she really my sister? Before Helena could answer, her assistant entered the office in a hurry. Helena, there are police officers and court officials at the gate. They have a judicial order. Helena hugged Sophie tightly, tears streaming down her face. Forgive me, my dear, I just wanted to protect you. Daniel arrived at the orphanage accompanied by his lawyer and the court officials. In the yard, other children watched curiously at the unusual commotion. Emma, who had been picked up from school by Jorge, held her father's hand tightly. As Sophie came down the stairs with Helena, everyone present could see what Daniel already knew. They were two drops of water, two reflections of the same mirror, separated by a decade of secrets. Mr. Daniel, Helena said, her voice firm. Despite the circumstances, before anything else, I need you to know, everything I did was out of love. Helena's office seemed smaller with so many people gathered inside. Daniel, his lawyer, the court officials, and Helena sat while the girls waited in the next room under Maria's watchful care. The air was heavy with decades of secrets about to be revealed. Why, Helena? Daniel asked, his voice more tired than angry. Why keep Sophie so close, practically under my nose all these years? Helena adjusted herself in her chair, her hands clasped on the table as if seeking strength. When everything happened that night, I was a different person, a dedicated nurse who thought she was doing the right thing. The right thing was separating two sisters? Daniel questioned, leaning forward. The right thing was saving a life, Helena replied, her eyes locking onto Daniel's. When the second baby was born, there was chaos. The doctors declared her dead too soon. When they realized the mistake, they panicked. The hospital was already under investigation for other cases. Peter, the lawyer, interrupted, and instead of correcting the mistake, they decided to cover it up. They wanted to make the baby disappear, Helena continued, her voice trembling. Talks of sending her to a distant orphanage, changing records. I couldn't allow that, so I offered an alternative. I would raise her, keep her safe, close to her real family. Daniel ran his hands through his face, trying to process the information. Close enough for the truth to come out one day. Maybe, Helena admitted. Deep down, I always knew this day would come. The girls, they have a connection beyond understanding. Sophie always felt like something was missing, just like Emma. Outside the office, the girls' voices could be heard. They were laughing at something, unaware of the gravity of the situation unfolding. The deposits, Daniel mentioned, the money that appeared in the orphanage's account. It wasn't my idea, Helena defended herself. The hospital, or rather some powerful people connected to it, wanted to guarantee my silence. I used the money to turn this place into something better, to give other children a home. One of the court officials cleared his throat, checking his watch. We need to proceed with the collection of material for the DNA test. Helena nodded, resigned. Sophie is already prepared. I talked to her. Just the basics. She's a smart girl. She always had questions about her origins. When the girls were called back into the office, Emma immediately ran to her father, while Sophie stayed close to Helena, though her eyes never left her sister. Girls, Daniel began, softening his tone. The doctors are going to do a little test, okay? Just a cotton swab in your mouth. It's to prove we're sisters? Sophie asked, surprising everyone with her insight. I already know. We are, I feel it here, she pointed to her heart. Emma smiled, reaching out for Sophie's hand. I've always known too. The procedure was quick and painless. The samples were collected and sealed in front of everyone present, with police escort assigned to accompany the material to the laboratory. The results will be ready in 3 days, the lab technician informed. As the legal procedures concluded, Emma and Sophie remained inseparable, whispering and laughing as if they had spent their entire lives together. In a way, Daniel thought, maybe they had. Their hearts had never truly been apart. What happens now? Sophie asked, her small voice breaking the silence. Helena held back tears. Now, my love, we wait for the results and... No, Daniel interrupted, surprising everyone. Now we all have dinner together. The girls need time to process all this, and we adults need to talk about how to make this transition as smooth as possible for them. Peter looked at his client in surprise. Daniel, are you sure? I am, he responded, looking at the girls. For 10 years, these children were kept apart. I won't let another minute be wasted. Helena discreetly wiped a tear. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me yet, Daniel replied, his voice firm. We still have a lot to resolve, but the girls come first now. As they left the orphanage, Emma and Sophie walked, ahead holding hands. Daniel couldn't help but think of Sophie. Somewhere he was sure she was smiling, watching her daughters finally reunited. Maria, who had watched everything in silence, approached Daniel. You're doing the right thing, she said gently. Sophie would be proud. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange. It was the end of a day that would forever mark the lives of everyone involved, but it was also the beginning of a new journey, one of healing, forgiveness, and, above all, love. The 3 days leading up to the DNA results were a whirlwind of emotions for everyone. Daniel decided to host Helena and Sophie in his mansion, turning one of the guest suites into a temporary space for them. The decision, though unusual, was motivated by the desire to give the girls as much time together as possible. Emma was radiant. For the first time in her life, she felt truly complete. The two girls were inseparable, spending hours talking, playing, and discovering all the similarities they shared. Look, Dad, Emma exclaimed during breakfast on the second day. Sophie has ticklish spots exactly like mine. Daniel watched in amazement as the two seemed to fill in each other's gaps. It was like a puzzle finally being put together, after years of missing pieces. Helena, on the other hand, was struggling internally. The guilt of keeping the secret for so many years weighed on her shoulders, but at the same time she couldn't deny the joy of seeing Sophie so happy. The night before the DNA results arrived, Daniel found Helena on the balcony, gazing at the city lights. How are you handling all this? He asked, handing her a cup of tea. Helena took the drink, her hands trembling slightly. It's surreal. For 10 years, Sophie was my whole world. Now I see her flourishing in ways I never imagined. You raised her well, Helena, Daniel admitted, surprising even himself with the words. Sophie is an incredible girl. So is Emma, Helena replied, a sad smile on her lips. Sophie would be proud. The mention of Sophie's name brought a momentary silence between them. It was still a wound for Daniel, but now, with the discovery of Sophie, he felt like a part of his wife had returned. You know, Daniel began, looking at the horizon, I've spent the past few days thinking about how Sophie would handle all this. And I came to the conclusion that she would probably bring us all together just like we are now, and say that the past can't be changed, but the future is in our hands. Helena wiped away a tear. She was always wise beyond her years. What happened was wrong, Daniel continued, his voice firm but not accusatory. But I see how much you love Sophie, and how much she loves you. I can't ignore that. Before Helena could respond, they heard laughter from the girls' room. Quietly, they approached the slightly ajar door and saw Emma and Sophie lying on the bed, flipping through an old photo album. Is this Mom? Sophie asked, pointing at a picture of Sophie. Emma nodded. Yes. Wasn't she beautiful? Dad says I have her smile. We do, Sophie corrected, smiling. We're identical, remember? The two laughed and hugged. It was a scene that could melt even the hardest heart. Daniel and Helena exchanged a look. At that moment, it became clear that regardless of the DNA results, their lives were now irrevocably intertwined. The morning of the DNA test results arrived with a tense atmosphere in the mansion. Daniel, Helena, Emma, and Sophie gathered in the living room, waiting for the lawyer Peter to arrive with the official envelope. The girls, although sensing the importance of the moment, remained calm as if they already knew the truth in their hearts. When Peter entered, carrying the sealed document, everyone fell silent. He took a deep breath before speaking. Before I open this, Peter said, looking at the two girls, I want you to know that whatever is written here doesn't change what you've already built together. Emma and Sophie exchanged glances and smiled at each other, their hands clasped tightly. Peter carefully opened the envelope and read the document aloud. With 99.9% certainty, the analyzed samples indicate a twin sibling relationship between the tested individuals. A collective sigh filled the room. Although they all already knew the truth, seeing it confirmed on paper carried a different weight. "And now?" Sophie asked, her voice small but firm. Daniel knelt in front of the girls, holding both their hands. "Now, my loves, we begin a new chapter. Together." Helena, with tears in her eyes, joined them. "Sophie, my love, you will always be my daughter in my heart. But now you have the chance to know your biological family, your history." "But I don't want to lose you," Sophie exclaimed, hugging Helena tightly. "And you won't," Daniel assured her, surprising everyone. "Helena, I know we have a lot to resolve legally, but if you're willing, I would like you to remain part of the girls' lives. Maybe we can find a way to share custody." The proposal caught Helena off guard. You would do that?" Daniel nodded. "For them, we'll do whatever it takes." Emma and Sophie looked at each other in pure joy and relief. The future was still uncertain, with many details to work out. But one thing was clear: the family that had been divided for so long was finally coming together, stronger and more complete than ever. That night, as the girls slept together, embracing each other as if afraid of being separated again, Daniel found an old photo of Sophie pregnant. Staring at the image, he whispered, "Thank you for guiding us here, my love. I promise to take care of our girls." A gentle breeze entered through the window, as if it were the universe responding, carrying the promise of better days ahead. The weeks following the revelation brought a series of changes for everyone. The once silent and somber mansion now echoed with the laughter of the twin sisters and the energy of a family being rebuilt. Daniel, with the help of Peter, began the legal process to formalize his rights as Sophie's biological father, while also working out a shared custody arrangement with Helena. He recognized that despite everything, Helena had been the only mother Sophie had known for 10 years, and separating them entirely would be as cruel as what had been done to his daughters in the past. One afternoon, while the girls played in the garden under Maria's watchful eyes, Daniel and Helena sat in the office discussing the next steps. "They're adapting incredibly well," Daniel observed. Helena nodded. "Better than I expected. It's as if they always knew, in a way." Daniel sighed, looking at some documents on his desk. "This makes me think about the future, about how we'll handle everything moving forward." Helena straightened up in her chair, preparing for what could be a difficult conversation. "I understand if you want full custody, Daniel. Legally, you have every right, and I—" "No," Daniel interrupted her gently. "That's not what I'm thinking. Actually, I have a proposal for you." Intrigued, Helena leaned in. "The Bright Future Orphanage has done an incredible job under your direction," Daniel continued. "But I imagine with everything that's happened, it must be difficult for you to continue there." Helena looked down, saddened. "The board asked me to step down temporarily, at least until everything is settled." "What if we could do something bigger?" Daniel suggested, his eyes shining with an idea. "I've been thinking about creating a foundation. Not just an orphanage, but an organization that helps reunite separated families, offering psychological and legal support." Helena blinked, surprised. "That would be amazing. But how—" "With your experience and my resources," Daniel explained, "we could make a real difference in the lives of many families. Turn our story into something good." The proposal left Helena speechless. It was more than she ever expected, especially given the circumstances. "Daniel, I don't know what to say," she stammered, emotional. "Just say you'll think about it," he said with a kind smile. "Not just for the work, but because it would allow us to create an environment where Sophie can have both of us in her life, without conflict." At that moment, Emma and Sophie burst into the office, their excited voices breaking the seriousness of the conversation. "Dad, Helena, you won't believe it," Emma exclaimed. "We found a bird's nest in the garden," Sophie added, both girls speaking almost in unison. Daniel and Helena exchanged amused looks. It was incredible how in such a short time the girls had developed such a natural synchronicity. "That's wonderful, girls," Helena smiled. But remember, we must not disturb the nest, okay? We know, they responded in chorus before running back outside. They're amazing together, Daniel commented, watching them through the window. They are, Helena agreed, her voice soft. Daniel, about your proposal, I accept. I think it's an incredible opportunity to make a difference. Daniel's face lit up. Great! Let's start working out the details immediately. I want this foundation to be our legacy for them. In the following days, the mansion became a planning center. Daniel gathered a team of lawyers, social workers, and psychologists to help structure the new foundation. Helena, with her experience at the orphanage, provided valuable insights into the real needs of children and families in vulnerable situations. Emma and Sophie, ever curious, frequently peeked into the meetings, fascinated by the adults' enthusiasm. What do you think about calling it Eternal Bonds? Emma suggested one evening during dinner. Or how about Hearts United? Sophie added. Daniel and Helena exchanged surprised and emotional glances. How about combining both ideas? Daniel proposed. The United Bonds Foundation. The girls clapped excitedly, while Helena smiled, tears in her eyes. It's perfect, she whispered. As the plans for the foundation took shape, new challenges arose. The media had started speculating about the sudden closeness between the technology mogul and the former orphanage director, and rumors about Sophie's past began circulating. We need to get ahead of this, Peter advised in a meeting. A public statement, maybe even a controlled interview. Daniel looked at Helena, seeking her opinion. She nodded slowly. The girls deserve for the truth to be told, but on our terms. They decided on an exclusive interview with a respected journalist. On the eve of the interview, Daniel gathered Emma and Sophie in his office. Girls, he began gently, tomorrow we're going to share our story with the world. Are you ready for that? Emma and Sophie looked at each other, a silent conversation passing between them. Finally, Sophie spoke. We are, Dad, but can we be there too? We want to tell our part of the story. Daniel felt his heart swell with pride. Of course, my brave ones. This is your story, as much as it is ours. That night, as the mansion finally quieted down, Daniel found Helena on the balcony looking at the stars. Nervous about tomorrow? He asked, joining her. A little, she admitted, but also at peace. I feel like we're finally doing the right thing. Daniel nodded, his gaze lost in the horizon. You know, Helena, amidst all this craziness, I've realized something. What? She asked, turning to him. That sometimes the most unexpected circumstances create the most beautiful families, he replied with a soft smile. Helena smiled back, feeling for the first time in a long while that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The morning of the interview arrived with a bright, clear sky, as if the universe itself were preparing to witness the truth unfold. The mansion was abuzz with activity, cameras being set up in the living room, microphones adjusted, and last-minute preparations being finalized. Emma and Sophie, dressed in matching outfits, a small detail that had become a habit, observed everything with a mix of curiosity and excitement. Daniel, wearing a sharp navy blue suit, spoke in hushed tones with Helena, who had opted for a pastel-colored ensemble that exuded calm and professionalism. Remember, Daniel said to the girls moments before the cameras started rolling, you only need to be yourselves. This is our story, and we're telling it with honesty. The journalist, Rebecca, a well-respected professional known for her compassionate approach, arrived right on time. After introductions and final adjustments, the interview began. We're here today, Rebecca started, looking straight into the camera, to share a story that feels like something out of a novel, yet is as real as the people sitting in front of me. Mr. Daniel, could you tell us how it all began? Daniel took a deep breath, his gaze briefly flickering to a framed photo of Sophie on the wall before he spoke. It all started 10 years ago, on what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. As he recounted the events of that fateful night at the hospital, the cameras captured the reactions of those listening. Emma held Sophie's hand tightly, both of them absorbing every word. When it was Helena's turn to speak, her voice wavered slightly. I was young, scared, and faced with an impossible decision. I knew what was happening was wrong, But I also knew that baby, Sophie, needed someone to love and protect her. And how was it raising Sophie while knowing the truth all these years? Rebecca asked gently. Helena looked at Sophie, tears shimmering in her eyes. Every day was both a gift and a struggle. I loved Sophie with all my heart, but I carried the weight of a secret I knew would one day come to light. I always hoped that when that moment came, Sophie would understand that everything I did was out of love. The camera focused on Sophie, who smiled softly at Helena before speaking. I understand now. Helena, my mom, gave me everything she could, and now I have even more. I have two families. Emma, not wanting to be left out, added, and I didn't just gain a sister, I gained another mom in Helena. The sincerity of the girls brought smiles to everyone's faces, briefly lightening the weight of the conversation. Rebecca, masterfully, guiding the discussion, turned to Daniel. Mr. Daniel, how are you all adapting to this new family dynamic? Daniel glanced at Helena before answering. We're learning day by day. The most important thing is what's best for the girls. That's why we decided to create the United Bonds Foundation, to help other families who might be going through similar situations. The interview continued, touching on the foundation's goals, the legal process of shared custody, and how Emma and Sophie were adjusting to their new reality. The girls, with the honesty only children possess, provided some of the most touching moments. It's like I always knew something was missing, Emma explained. And now I feel whole, Sophie nodded. We're like two puzzle pieces that finally fit together. When the cameras finally stopped recording, a moment of silence filled the room, as if everyone were processing the depth of what had just been shared. Rebecca, visibly moved, thanked the family. You are incredible, she said. This story is going to touch so many hearts. The days following the interview were a whirlwind of reactions. The media coverage was overwhelmingly positive, with people from all over reaching out to express their support. The foundation's phone lines were flooded with calls, some from families in need, others from people wanting to help. One afternoon, while Daniel and Helena sorted through emails and donation offers, Emma and Sophie ran into the office, carrying a large poster. What's this, girls? Helena asked, curious. They unfolded the poster, revealing a colorful drawing of a large family. Daniel, Helena, the twins, and several other children all smiling. It's our expanded family, Emma explained excitedly. All the kids were going to help with the foundation, Sophie added. They're part of our family too, right? Daniel and Helena exchanged a look, their hearts full. Yes, my loves, Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. Every life we touch, every family we reunite, they are all part of our story now. Helena knelt to hug the girls. You two are amazing, do you know that? So full of love and kindness. That night, as the city settled into quiet, the mansion was alive with warmth and hope. The future, which had once seemed so uncertain, now shone with endless possibilities. A family that had been born from pain and secrecy had transformed into something extraordinary, a beacon of hope for many. As Daniel watched Emma and Sophie fall asleep on the couch after a movie night, Helena beside him smiling softly, he felt a peace he hadn't known in years. We did it, didn't we? She whispered. We turned something painful into something beautiful. Daniel nodded, his eyes reflecting gratitude and determination. And this is just the beginning, he said, his gaze turning toward the horizon. There are so many other stories out there waiting for a happy ending, and we're going to help write them.